Okay, just more reading out of the book Origins of the Gods by Andrew Collins and Gregory L. Little. Was still in the section, part 1, section 11, 3 mystical, spiritual, life-changing events. We're still talking about, or reading about, Edward Cayce. Past life readings emerge. 1923 was, let's see if I got this going hard. In 1923, the year 1923 was the start of another type of reading. The readings that have received the most media attention. A wealthy Dayton, Ohio businessman, Arthur Lammers, brought the Cayce family to Dayton and began a series of readings on topics Lammers had an interest in. It was the first time anyone asked Cayce many questions outside of the health area. Reincarnation emerged in an October 11, 1923 reading when Cayce was describing the life of the person requesting the reading. Quote, third appearance on this plane. He called it a plane. He was once a monk. End quote. There began what became known as life readings. The story of an individual's influence from past lives. Cayce's family was initially shocked and dismayed at the mention of reincarnation. They were deeply religious Christian family. They were a Christian family, I guess. They were a deeply religious Christian family, and Cayce was a popular and sought-after Sunday school teacher everywhere he lived. But the Cayce family knew that many people had been helped by the health readings, and they made a decision. They would continue with the psychic readings unless anyone was hurt. That never occurred. Between 1925 and 1945, about 2,500 life readings, that's a lot, were conducted. In addition, specific readings were held so that the source, in quotes, of Cayce's information could address topics such as Atlantis, creation, spirituality, and similar things. The life reading mentioned an astonishingly wide range of topics, which emerged as events in the past lives of individuals were described. The source of the information Cayce was able to access during his trance states explained itself in many readings by relating that all events, thoughts, and actions are recorded in the, quote, skein between space and time. The skein, or is this, how do you pronounce it again? Skein, between space and time, which Cayce often referred to as the Akashic records. Excuse me. I'm having a hard time reading them, so more than usual. A way to visualize this is that all actions create vibrations, and these vibrations remain fixed in space like the grooves on a vinyl record. A search of the database of the Cayce readings revealed nearly 1,500 Cayce readings used the term vibration. Many of these revealed that health was often related to vibrational forces. For example, in 1943 reading, Cayce recommended the use of high vibrational light. In the reading, he related electricity or vibration is the same energy same power ye all call God. Not that God is an electrical light, or that electric machine, but that vibration that is creative is of the same energy as life itself. In 1923, from 1923 until Casey's death in 1945, readings were held that fell into 6 general areas. 1. Health readings. 2. Personal life readings. 3. Spirituality, philosophy, and religion. 4. Ancient history, earth changes and prophecy. And 5. Business-related readings. And 6. Readings that focus on specific mysteries. An example of the last type is represented in Casey's reading for George Putnam regarding the disappearance of Amelia Earhart in 1937. In recent years, the Casey organization has released the names of some of the famous people who had readings from Casey, corresponded with him, or met with him privately. Many of these can be found in Sidney Kirkpatrick's 2 books. Notable people included President Woodrow Wilson during his last years as president, Thomas Edison. In one instance, their discussion regarded a machine to record voices of the dead. Irving Berlin and George Gershwin, and Nelson Rockefeller, George Manny and Gloria Swanton, Ernest Hemingway's mother, David Sarnoff, founder of NBC, founder of Goodyear Tires, and major filmmakers of Universal Studios and Paramount Pictures, and various others. Casey was mentioned by many of these people as being helpful in several ways. For example, the inventor of FM radio, Mitchell Hastings, credited Casey as helping him develop his radio. As related at the beginning of this section, only the briefest background of Casey has been given here. However, it is probably appropriate to summarize this information by repeating that Casey's readings on health formed the foundation for the holistic health movement, and that Casey was widely acknowledged as its father. In addition, Casey's readings about the ancient world have proven to be an incredible inspiration for many researchers and writers. Skeptics will believe and assert the type of things about Casey that define them as skeptics, but undeniably Edward Casey stands as the greatest psychic who ever lived in America. Casey on life in the universe and elsewhere. One important thing that should be addressed about Casey's statements regarding life and the universe is that he made it clear in many readings that human life is composed of souls that push themselves into physical matter. These souls, composed of vibrational energy created at the beginning of time, had a mission. They essentially moved from planet to planet with solar systems, on what Casey called sojourns. The purpose of the sojourns is to allow the individual soul to experience various things and develop and evolve a consciousness that would allow it to eventually rejoin with the Creator. Souls were given free will by the Creator, and when Casey was asked why God would create souls and give them free will, he related that it was God's desire for companionship and expression. Another reading explained all souls were created in the beginning and are finding their way back to whence they came. It is as if the creation of souls was a consequence of creation. The sojourns of the soul to planets and stars were not done in physical bodies, but instead they were spiritual journeys during which the energy of a particular soul would spend time at various places where it would be immersed in influences emanating from the planet. According to Casey, in our solar system, physical manifestation of the soul in human form only took place on Earth. This is one aspect of Casey that is unlike all of the others, who asserted that life existed on the Moon, Venus, and Mars, and other planets of the solar system. However, it has a remarkable similarity to Native American death journey ideas. Several Casey readings spoke of life elsewhere in the universe and the fact that other planetary systems not only existed but were also inhabited. A 1934 reading related, quote, "As in the earth we find the elements are peopled, as the earth has its own moon and satellites enjoined in its environ, so it is with the other planets. The earth with its 3/4 water, with its elements, is peopled. Yes, so are the various activities on other solar systems." End quote. Several other readings mentioned other worlds in the universe. For the earth, quote, "For the earth is only an atom in the universe of worlds," end quote. And, quote, "There are worlds without end," end quote. One of the most significant differences between Casey's statements about life in the universe and the assertions made by spiritualists Swedenborg, the contactees, and some who touted the ancient astronaut hypothesis relates to life on the planets in our solar system. It was universally claimed by all of these, quote, others, end quote, that Venus, Mars, Moon, and several other planets in the solar system were inhabited by humans. Swedenborg, Helen Blavatsky, the founder of the Theosophy, the contactees, many 1800 scientific writers, all asserted that people similar to humans existed on these other planets. Casey gave a completely different answer. He was specifically asked about this in 2 readings, but unfortunately no one ever asked him any follow-up questions. In 1923, Casey was given one in Dayton, Ohio readings, which collectively covered a vast range of topics. During the reading, he was unexpectedly asked, quote, "Are any of the planets other than Earth inhabited by human beings or animal life of any kind?" End quote. Without any hesitation, he answered no. Oddly and frustratingly, I'll add, Casey was not asked a follow-up question. Some 13 years later, a life reading was held in Virginia Beach when the same essential question was posed. He was asked, quote, "Upon what planets other than the Earth does human life exist?" End quote. And Casey's reply was, quote, "None as human life in the Earth," end quote. But once again, no relevant follow-up question was asked. In his 2007 book, Edward Casey and the Cosmos, astronaut James Mullaney makes it clear that Casey's readings that relate that no human or animal life exists on any other planet refer specifically to planets in our solar system. Casey himself made it very clear that life existed elsewhere in the universe and that there were, quote, worlds without end, end quote, and other, quote, people of the universe, end quote. With our current exploration of Mars and the moons of other planets, it will be quite interesting to see if Casey's statements prove correct. Mars, perhaps, may have once been inhabited by humans or other intelligent beings, but according to Casey, it isn't now. And that doesn't appear to be the case. But it is, there is something there about, there is, I filmed it. There's spirits on Mars, is what there is. And they look like friggin' vampires looking Nephilim, that's what they look like. Anyways, becoming increasingly likely that the exploration of Mars and the moon and moons of Jupiter will reveal some form of life, most likely microbial, and perhaps evidence of intelligent life that existed there in the remote past. In any case, Casey stands alone in a crowd of people who assert that people exist on our other solar system planets. So they exist on our other solar system planets. Okay. He is the only one who stated strongly that neither human nor animal life is present in the solar system except on Earth. Now we're talking flesh and blood, but we're not talking spiritual now. Casey and ancient astronauts. As related earlier, the idea of ancient astronauts visiting Earth and the influencing its development is far from modern. It is a theme that runs deep in many other psychic and spiritualistic belief systems. But it wasn't a topic of much interest in the Casey readings. There are only two very obvious references to ancient astronaut visitations in the Casey readings, but enough information was given in the readings to know the time frame and the basic location of both. In 1938 life reading, Casey was describing the past lives of an inquirer when he stated, quote, "Before this, we find the entity was in the land now known as the Mexican Yucatan land. ... There were the beginnings of unfoldments of the understanding that there were other portions of the same land, or thus that were visiting from other worlds or planets." The time frame of this reading indicated that the visitation took place around the time of Christ. The second reading detailing visitations from other worlds is slightly less obvious, and it could be interpreted in at least two different ways. In 1938, Casey was giving a life reading, and after going through astrological influences on the individual, he went through the person's past lives. And when he reached the person's earliest time frame, this is what merged. Before that, we find the entity was in the Atlantean land. There we find the entity was very close to those in authority, being that one who was the keeper of the portals, as well as the messages that were received from the visitation of those from the outer spheres. That's a pretty interesting phrase. And at the latter part of the entity's experience there. So portals and outer spheres. Balls, right? In this 1938 reading, the man who received the messages from these visitations was told of a coming destruction of Atlantis and the need to make a record of their history. This individual then became involved in the creation of a Hall of Records in 3 locations: in Egypt under the Sphinx, in Yucatan, probably at Piedras Negras, Guatemala, and in a now sunken temple near the island of Bimini in the Bahamas. Casey used the terms portals and messages did I say that right? Casey's use of the terms portals and messages might imply that the information about the coming destruction of Atlantis came from some sort of telepathic or electronic portal. In fact, Casey's story of Atlantis details a crystal that was used by the Atlantean priests and priestess for telepathic contact with other realms. The crystal was called the, I guess it'd be Taui, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's Tuoai. The Tuai stone? I think that might be what it's called. However, in the same reading, Casey used the phrase visitation from the outer spheres. That implies actual physical visitations. Or visits, excuse me. Like Joan of Arc, Casey had a visitation from an angel at the age of 13 that changed history. While skeptics deny anything paranormal about Casey and deride the accuracy of his readings, the truth is that something rather profound lies at the core of Casey's story. It is clear evidence of the existence of a paranormal world. It is another large piece of the puzzle that shows our ideas about the gods formed and how the forces underlying paranormal manifestations operate. What is extraordinary evidence? Carl Sagan is credited with the phrase, quote, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence," end quote. It is a variation of the French scholar Pierre-Simon Laplace, something like that. Famous line, quote, "The weight of evidence for an extraordinary claim must be proportioned to its strangeness," end quote. We often hear the idea bantered around as if it is true, but the reality is that for most claims in ufology, Native American mythology, and in the cases of individuals such as Joan of Arc and Casey, there is no amount of evidence that is acceptable to skeptics. In truth, it is probably accurate to simply state that claims of any type simply require proof. By requiring, quote, "extraordinary evidence," end quote, as a bar of acceptance, it implies that no amount of evidence will ever be acceptable. There is, however, one other event we'll discuss here that leads us to the inescapable conclusion that something paranormal is out there, something that manifests, is seen by thousands of people, and is inexplicable. Apparitions in I don't even know how to pronounce it. Zeiton Egypt. I think that's how I'm going to pronounce it. Apparitions in Zeiton, Egypt. Of all the so-called Marian apparitions, the apparitions at the Church of St. Mary in Zeiton, Egypt, from 1968 to 1970 stands out as the most spectacular case and also one with the most documented evidence. Ironically, it also may be one of the least known. The idea that it has the most documented evidence comes from the testimony recorded by countless thousands of witnesses, hundreds of actual photographs of apparitions, and even some scientific study. Maybe we should figure out how to pronounce this name. So we'll go here. Think about reading the scroll of Melchizedek. Maybe. Let's see what this is. So I would say Zaition. But that doesn't mean I'm right. I'm very, very rarely right about these words.
Zaytun, Cairo. Zaytun, Cairo.
Zaytun. So I was close. Kind of, not really. Zaytun, Cairo. Zaytun, Cairo. Zaytun, Cairo. Apparitions in Zaytun, Cairo. Egypt. Zaytun, Cairo, Egypt? This isn't Cairo. Zaytun is a small suburb of northern Cairo, and legends associated with this particular Coptic church relate that it was a specific location visited by Mary and Joseph during their trip into Egypt. According to the church records, the church was built in 1924 after, quote, the Virgin Mary appeared to the late Kali Pasha Abraham, am I saying this right? Pasha Abraham, and requested him to build a church after her name in this place. Why would they want to do that? That's nonsense. It is also stated that the historical record that she promised to reappear at the church some 50 years in the future. The events of Zaytun took place at a time of heightened tension between Israel and several Arab countries, including Egypt. Thus, the event was only scantily reported outside of Egypt. It began less than a year after the Six-Day War between Israel and the combined forces of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. By the time a ceasefire treaty was made, Israel had taken the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and the Sinai and the West Bank of the Jordan River, including parts of Jerusalem. In the years that followed, many Arabs were under Israeli rule, and the conflict raged near the Sinai. The tensions and the uncertainty in the region have been cited by many as the primary cause of the apparitions in Zaytun. No one knows for certain how many people saw or photographed the apparitions, but it is estimated to be in the hundreds of thousands to several million. It began in April 2 of 1986. That was your year born. That night, two Muslim mechanics were working in a garage across the street. One of them spotted a woman dressed in white standing on the large dome located at the center of the church's rooftop. They initially thought that a nun was about to commit suicide, and one of the witnesses went into the church to get the priest while the other left to get an ambulance. By the time they returned, the figure was gone. The priest was mystified, but came to think that they might have seen some sort of apparition. The word apparition spread quickly, and people started watching the church every night from that time on. They were not disappointed, and immediately it was believed that the Virgin Mary was appearing. On May 5th, 1968, the Egyptian Gazette ran a front page headline, quote, Virgin Mary appeared in Zeitung, end quote. The New York Times reported on the apparition that same day and relating that the apparition, quote, had been witnessed by thousands of Egyptians and foreigners, end quote. According to the Egyptian Gazette of April 11, 1969, on the night of April 2, 1969, over 250,000 people assembled outside the church to mark the first anniversary of the apparition. Starting in April 3 of 1968, thousands of people began attending the nightly watches, and the apparitions continued until mid-1970, when the appearances became infrequent. Until late 1969, the apparitions were viewed almost every night. The alarmed Egyptian government made several official reports on the phenomena, as did the Coptic Christian Church. The appearances always started with brilliant flashes of light appearing on the church's domes, and the lights were often so bright that the witnesses were unable to distinguish details or features of the apparitions. The blinding flashes typically lasted for about 15 minutes until more solid forms materialized near the central dome. Two distinct figures were nearly always seen when the apparitions materialized inside the light. The first apparition was a veiled female draped in the flowing white robe. She was often seen holding what appeared to be an infant, and a starry crown floating above her head. At times she seemed to offer an olive branch to the witnesses. Occasionally she appeared in a solid, easily recognizable form and moved around the rooftop. The second apparition consisted of what were interpreted as luminescent, glowing dove-like forms circling overhead. The doves typically appeared after a shower of sparkling lights rained down over the crowd, and they were usually present in the entire time of the joint apparition. On June 8, 1968, the apparition was viewed continually from 9 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. There are hundreds of black and white photos made of the apparitions, with several photos detailing placed in the public domain. Many photos show the doves and the figures of the woman and the amorphous blobs of light around the church dome. And then I have these photographs of it, of these alleged apparitions of Mary and etc. I don't see Mary in it, but that doesn't mean anything. I guess it's to the eye of the beholder, right? It's the eye of the believer, right? It's just like last night when I was doing that show with Biggie. He saw things in the picture, and I saw things, but we didn't see the same thing. That's how this crazy stuff works. Everybody sees something different. Many people don't see anything at all. In 1996, my wife and I visited the church. We were able to obtain copies of the original Egyptian newspaper accounts, as well as interview several of the witnesses, including a couple who were there at the very beginning. The witnesses had all become devout believers in the phenomenon and were clearly very sincere. All of them were more than willing to share their stories. A newspaper account from April 11, 1969 reported that the Pope of Alexandria, Kyrilo VI, commissioned a committee to evaluate the events starting the moment they began. The committee members themselves witnessed the events, and relating it looked like an illuminated, dazzling white cloud. 100 centimeters by 600 centimeters in size, and it formed a sad shape of the Virgin after the crucifixion of Christ. The apparition was preceded by a shining, quick-moving white cloud forming the shape of a dove. On one occasion, I saw the vision in a full-size human form, surrounded by a glorious halo of shining light. Bishop Athanasius, one of the committee members, stated, "The crowd was tremendous. It was too difficult to move among the people, but I tried and I worked my way to the front of this figure. There she was, 5 to 6 meters above the dome, high in the sky, full figure, like a phosphorus statue, but not so stiff as a statue. There was movement of the body and of the clothing. It was very difficult for me to stand all the time before the figure, as human waves pushed me in front all sides. It pushed me in from all sides. One would estimate the crowd to be 100,000, and in an hour or so I think I stood before the figure 8 or 9 times. It never disappeared. Our Lady looked to the north. She waved her hand. She blessed the people. Her garments swayed in the wind." Another witness was Wandi T. Shunbo, a Protestant and a Mobil Oil employee. He related, quote, "About 9:50, we saw lightning appear over the church. Within seconds, it formed into the shape of the Virgin. I could distinguish only a difference in color between the skin and the face and the hands in the veil. It was evident when St. Mary walked back and forth. When she disappeared from our side of the church, the people from the other side shouted they were seeing her. Then she returned to our side for about 5 minutes." Science on Zotion, something like that. I don't know. I don't care. In 1989, the late Canadian neurologist Michael Persinger and the geologist John Durer analyzed the Zotion apparitions from the idea that they may have resulted from plasmas or piezoelectric discharges emitting from the church domes. They statistically calculated the relationship between the dates of the appearances and regional seismic disturbances, earthquakes, for a time period or just over a year during which most of the sightings were reported. They found that the resulting correlation was able to correctly predict 80% of the actual nightly appearances, as well as 92% of the nights when there were no reported sightings. However, they found that the earthquake activity centered some 400 kilometers away leading them to conclude that some fundamental variable has not been accommodated. Persinger and Durr speculated that the church's rooftop dome had become the focal point of plasma's discharges from the earth as a result of the underground tectonic strain located some 400 kilometers away. As for the impression that the emerging forms of the apparition took on the shape of a female, they asserted that individuals' underlying beliefs, hope, and imaginations did that through psychological processes. In recent psychological analysis of the Zetion phenomena relied heavily on Jung's speculation in his book Flying Saucers. According to the underlying idea, Egypt in 1968 was a place of great turmoil, and the populace was looking for an outside intervention and salvation. In brief, the event supposedly occurred because the male-dominated culture in Egypt was being counterbalanced by the feminine side, appearing symbolically in spectacular form for all to see. This idea was somewhat echoing a 1973 study that related the apparition of Zetion expresses the yearning for salvation from suffering, the hope of a millennial dream, and it seems to me that the appearance of the Virgin symbolizes the disillusionment with the secular political explanations and a turning toward the religious, to a deeper level of existence in terms of which it all makes sense. Despite the idea that the populace witnessing the event was motivated by turmoil and was seeking for salvation from the unbearable conditions, we are left with this. The apparitional forms were often seen as solid and distinguishable objects. They moved and were seen to sway in the wind, and they interacted with the witnesses and were documented by hundreds of photographs. Summary: how can we link together three such seemingly different tales? How can we connect Joan of Arc, Casey, and the Zetion apparitions? First, all of them began with brilliant flashes of light. Within the lights, solid forms took shape. Did I say that wrong? Solid forms took shape, forms that were recognizable to the witness and witnesses. All three events had a rather profound effect on history and individuals' lives, extending far beyond the lives of the people directly involved. Both Casey and Joan of Arc attest to some otherworldly force intruding into our reality. Zetion is also shows us that there is clearly something else that exists. Whatever it is, it does, and indeed intrudes into our reality and interact with us in profound ways. It is clearly the same force that ancient Native Americans spoke of and communed with. It may also be the same force that interacted with some of the contactees and individuals like Swedenborg, and perhaps even with the biblical prophets and ancient Babylonians. With respect to the skeptical phrase, quote, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, it should be clear that all three of these events cited in this chapter are extraordinary. All three certainly have evidence, but even the proof of Xention's apparitions isn't sufficient for skeptics. Xention had hundreds of thousands to millions of witnesses, hundreds of thousands of photographs and investigations by both the government and officials of the church have confirmed the event. That's extraordinary evidence, but it all comes from Egypt, so it is easy for skeptics to ignore and discount it. Whatever force or phenomena is behind such events, it is clearly something paranormal, something beyond the reach of current scientific understanding. What is the origin of this force? What is its nature? What is its purpose or intent? As we continue on this quest, we now move to more recent events that also have millions of witnesses. And that was section 12, part 1. Scientists look at UFO phenomena. And that's probably a good place to stop. Kicking butt, learn. Keep on learning. Just keep pushing. No matter how bad the situation, keep on pushing.
You're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. If you're going to try, go all the way. This could mean losing girlfriends, wives, relatives, jobs, and maybe your mind.
Take it slow. Are you so